In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, we will go through a chapter of the Bible and make it make sense in your life today. Studies routinely show that reading your Bible regularly significantly lowers symptoms of depression, anxiety, and anger, whilst also increasing forgiveness, compassion, and a sense of purpose. So if you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. Today we're going through Genesis chapter 23, and we literally just saw one of the greatest tests in the history of the Bible yesterday. So if you haven't seen yesterday's video, please go and take a look. But today we're going to go through Genesis 23, and we're going to be talking about the death of Sarah. Yeah, the death of Sarah, and we're going to see some deep biblical unlocks in this chapter of the Bible as well. Obviously, this is obviously going to be a quite sad moment in Abraham's life as well, but it's going to help us sort of paint the picture for the rest of the biblical story. So, Genesis 23. I'm going to read the entire chapter, verse by verse. If you haven't read other chapters, whilst I would encourage you to go watch some of the other videos, it's perfectly fine. We'll be able to understand nonetheless. So, Genesis 23. Sarah's death, Abraham's careful purchase of a cave in Machpelah. We're also going to see that. But this chapter is a lot less dramatic than what we saw yesterday. But again, it's got a lot of philosophical and theological weight. So, Chapter 23. Sarah lived to be about 127 years old. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. Verse 3. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. He said, I am a foreigner and stranger among you. Sell me some property for a burial site so that I may bury my dead. So, verses 1 to 4, we have death brings covenant memory to the surface. Sarah dies in, you heard that, Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron, okay? And then Abraham's grieving, and then Abraham is grieving, and then he has a direct appeal to the Hittites. He says, I am a foreigner and stranger among you, okay? So, he technically already possesses God's promise of land, right? But he is still a pilgrim and has to make a lawful and public claim for his family's future. And this scene is interesting. I don't know if you caught this, right? But essentially what's happening here is it's reminding us that even though Abraham has been promised by God to have all of this land, he still needs to make concrete acts of grief, burial, possession. He needs to make these concrete acts. He needs to talk, and he needs to sell property. He needs to make a burial site. The point is, God is not going to give you everything on a silver platter. You have to do some things. And sometimes it's going to be really painful things as well. So that's the important thing here. Cool. That's important to remember from this particular passage of the Bible. Okay, we're going to move on to verses 5 to 12. The Hittites replied to Abraham, Sir, listen to us. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will refuse you his tomb for burying your dead. Then Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land, the Hittites. He said to them, If you are willing to let me bury my dead, then listen to me and intercede with Ephron, son of Zohar, on my behalf. So he will sell me the cave of Machpelah, which belongs to him and is at the end of his field. Ask him to sell it for me for the full price as a burial site for you, among you. Ephron the Hittite was standing among his people, and he replied to Abraham in the hearing of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of his city. No, my lord, he said, listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Again, Abraham bowed down before the people of the land. So, here we see a little bit of bargaining with Ephron the Hittite in the presence of all the witnesses, but he shows immaculate and elaborate politeness. He said, Ephron offers the cave as a gift. Abraham insists on paying, right? And Abraham wants the indisputable title of having this thing. He wants to have this. You can see here, like, let me bury the dead. Ask him to sell it to me for the full price as a burial site among you, right? But he says, no, my lord. He said, listen to me. I will give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give you it in the presence of my people. Bury the dead. You have a public transaction, right? It's a public transaction, and again, it's going to it protects the family's claim to a particular to the funeral site or the burial site. It's important because it shows, and it's sort of modeling an upright and righteous interaction with the local community. So it shows that paying on full price, or insisting on paying the full price, preserves his honor, right? And doing it publicly is a transparent claim to the land. So what do we learn from this? Essentially, it's important to respect transparency and making sure that you're keeping your honor as well, in a certain sense. It's like respectful negotiation. It's a model for respectful negotiation. Okay, verses 13 to 16. And he said to Ephron in their hearing, listen to me, if you will. I will pay the price for the field. Accept it from me, so I can bury my dead here. Ephron answered Abraham, listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. But what is it between you and me? Bury your dead. Abraham agreed to Ephron's terms and weighed out for him the price that he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, according to the weight current among the merchants. Okay, so it was for 400 shekels of silver with witnesses present. Again, it's a little bit of legalism here. There's a legal formality. It's interesting because I'm interested to know how Abraham actually got this money, right? Because it doesn't actually say it anywhere that he has a job, that he earns a wage or anything. When did this currency come in? I swear this is the first time I'm seeing currency in the entire Bible. So it's interesting. I'm very interested to see how he managed to get this money. Maybe God provided him, like the same way on the Mount of Moriah, where it was called the Lord will provide. Perhaps, I don't know. It's interesting because it sort of just appears out of nowhere. So the family tomb again ties promise to the place. You can see that in Scripture, like God's gift is the promise, right? And human agency is the claim that Abraham has on a particular, but it's on a particular place. But Abraham does not passively wait. He already has the land, right? The land is already his, and yet he's still having honor, respect, guidance. Because the truth is, he could have been really prideful in this particular instance. He could say, God, this is my land. I can do whatever I want. I can have it. And in fact, it would have probably been acceptable, or at least understandable, considering that his wife has died. But he still shows the humility and the patience to say, you know what? I understand that I still need to abide by the legalistic and the honorable practices of this particular region. Otherwise, it's not going to be good. Verses 17 to 20. So Ephron's field in Machpelah near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it, and all the trees within the borders of the field, was deeded to Abraham as his property in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city. Afterward, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which is at Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave in it were deeded to Abraham by the Hittites as a burial site. So what just happened? Abraham buries Sarah. The cave of Machpelah becomes the ancestral burial site. And again, this action is going to anchor his family story in the land and create a place of remembrance for the promises that are going to continue through Isaac, and they're going to continue through Jacob. And this, unfortunately, and it's a little bit sad, but it's going to close Sarah's story, but again with dignity, and it's going to establish a pattern of honoring the dead in ancient Jewish society. All right, so what deep biblical unlocks can I understand, or can we understand from this particular passage? First one is grief and faith can coexist, right? We remember seeing way back in the Bible that Jesus wept. Now, the reason why Jesus wept was because in John 11:35, he saw, like he wept, and this is actually one of the shortest verses in many Bible translations, right? He saw Lazarus, his friend, even though he knew he was going to resurrect him later, he wept nonetheless. And the reason why he wept was because of his human nature. He was showing his humanity, compassion, and empathy for those in grief. But he's also illustrating something integral about God's character, which is God cares about human suffering. But he was also mourning and weeping for his friend's unbelief, right? So the point is here, it's not necessarily like we often have the idea that we shouldn't have grief. Like, that's not biblical, but it is. Jesus wept. He began to weep. And what that shows is you can allow sorrow its time while still trusting in God's promise. Okay? So it's interesting because Jesus also does say, let the dead bury the dead, Bible verse, like that. You can see that there in Luke chapter 9 verse 60. So it is important to have wisdom, right? So Jesus does say, let the dead bury the dead. So that is, it was a statement to a follower of his who wanted to bury his father. And Jesus says, attending spiritual matters should take priority over earthly obligations, even burial duties. I think the difference here is that, and he also says this in Matthew chapter 8 verse 22, I think the urgency and the context is key to understand the difference between the burial of Sarah versus let the dead bury the dead and follow me with urgency. The truth is, Abraham was following God's promise. Abraham was following the covenant that God had provided. And the truth is, like, we need to have spiritual discernment to determine whether or not we have to have urgency with our plan versus when we need to let the dead bury the dead. Okay, that's important. I mean, when Jesus said that as well, it's quite a harsh statement. But the important thing to remember is that, like, in Jesus' ministry, right, being a disciple in Jesus' ministry is a very limited time offer. Jesus was not going to be around for a long time. So I think that also adds to this. If this man wanted to delay further, right, like for example, if he is concerned about his inheritance and is concerned about other related factors which are adjacent to the fact that his father died, what Jesus is referring to is that there's a serious call regarding his ministry. But if he's a part of the plan, he's a part of God's promise, he's been trusting in God's promise, then Abraham, who is one of the key examples, we saw this in the very last chapter, Genesis 22, where he had to almost sacrifice his son, but God in the nick of time provided a substitute ram, and obviously he's going to provide a substitute lamb later on, which is Jesus. But it's important nonetheless that the important thing is that we're following God's plan, his covenant time, but immediate responses. And I think there's another thing that's there as well when Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead in Luke chapter 9 verse 60, and that is there is an immediate response. There is an urgency associated with our calling. Because if we are spiritually dead, we will remain dead in our sins if we could delay, and we keep delaying until a more convenient time. So that is another important thing to recognize, that if we keep delaying, we're actually diverting away from God's plan, and we're relying on our own intuition, our own emotions, our own feelings. So the point is, there was an urgency associated with God's calling when Jesus was present on the earth, and trusting in God's calling means you can rely on God's wisdom to determine whether or not it's really important to let the dead bury the dead, just keep focusing on spirituality, or we need to actually have the distinct place for honor and grief in certain situations as well. So it's all about relying on God's wisdom rather than our own wisdom, God's timing rather than our own timing, and so on and so forth. It's important again to recognize that there is a public and honest claim that's made here in the presence of legal witnesses. So the legality associated with particular actions is not necessarily it's not necessarily something bad, right? That is to say that we can have integrity, we can show integrity in all of our actions, all of our daily actions. So for example, a public witness doing it all in a public setting, that would be interesting, and actually would avoid it's actually showing wisdom, because doing certain actions in the presence of others is just a very fail-safe mechanism for avoiding ambiguity, and it's also important to ensure transparency. And I just wanted to say something. It's quite funny. Okay, it's not so funny, but this would have been really useful advice a few days ago. So a few days ago, my local church was running a raffle, right? So what you do is they essentially give a bunch of books, right? A bunch of books that you can buy, and you can rip out some tickets, and then you hand them back over, and then your name gets put in a draw to win like a car and to win some other really, really nice prizes, right? So my mom told me, hey, why don't you just hand over $20 to the person at the ticket counter? And then he told me, so I gave him the money, the $20. He took it and he told me, fill out this book and then come back. All right, so that's what I decided to do. I filled it out with all my names. Now, we were going to do it in the church itself, but then the church service began, so we were like, oh, okay, we'll do it later. He even told me, come back next week and do it. So we filled it out. I come back next week, book in hand, as he instructed. I gave it to him, and you know what he told me? He told me, I haven't written down that you've given me $20, so I can't accept this book. I'm like, but you took my money, right? I gave you the money. You just didn't accept it. Now, the problem was, it was just me and him, so there's literally no other way of trying to confirm whether or not I gave him the money or not. So I'm stuck in the situation where it's my word against his, and I gave him the money, but he's just not accepting it. He said, I cannot accept it, even though I gave it to the same person. He just didn't remember me. Now, I don't know if it's just because I'm not very recognizable, or whether or not I didn't make a very good impact. It doesn't matter. I gave him the money. Then I called my mum over, and she was like, oh, it's fine, just don't worry about it. I'm like, dude, it's whatever. That's just the way it ended up being. But if I had a witness with me, it would have been much easier. Also, if I had told him to write it down that I gave him $20, obviously I'm not entirely 100% sure about the intricacies of the raffle and whatnot, but they should, in theory, have more money than tickets because of this. So hopefully they'll see their mistake. Glory be to God. But always have a witness in these sorts of things. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help you keep up your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. I upload daily, so if you don't want to miss tomorrow's episode, feel free to rate the show and follow. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And always remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.